In 2003, I hit my ultimate goal, the corner office on the 40th floor of the Mercantile Exchange building. But something was missing. I felt a hole in my heart. There has to be more to life than just getting the next promotion, making more money, getting the raise. I call it smoldering discontent. That was me. And I think for many folks out there, they have that same feeling, but they don't know what to do with it. How can I go from success to significance and leave an impact? In the book Trade Up, I talk about this idea of identifying your area of significance. What are my strengths? What are my passions? What am I good at? What am I not good at? It takes time, it takes work. I wanted to make sure that I really flourish when it came to being a husband and a father. You're leaving a legacy that they can follow that's more than just about yourself, it's about others. At the Halftime Institute, some of the things that we've learned is to have a personal mission statement, to have a personal board of directors, to look through the obstacles that are in your life, to have an assessment of your life when it comes to your family and your spouse, and your health and your faith. What is priceless, and what are you doing to protect it? You're at your 80th birthday party, there's 200 of your closest friends, there's a microphone in front of the room, and each one walks up to that microphone to explain the impact that you've had in their life. If that was today, what would they be saying about you? That's the question I ask myself every day. My hope is that the book Trade Up is a resource for you on how you can begin the journey of going from success to significance, to leave a legacy. Our lives are stories. What does your legacy look like?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Thomas and David. Thanks for having me. When Thomas asked, by the way, I have made it all the way down here. I lived in Sugar Land in 1997, and oh my goodness, that is not the same place. I can't believe it. Yeah, we lived here in 1997. I actually ran the small Payne Weber office in Sugar Land, Texas, way back in 1997. So anyway, when Thomas asked for me to maybe come down here and speak to all of you, one of the things I was thinking about is how can I leave them something? I just didn't want to come in and share a story about the book that you have on the table, or I wanted to leave you with something. So my prayer and my hope today is, as we go through my presentation, is that you will receive something from it, that you'll be able to walk away from here with something that's tangible that you can use as you go forward. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of halftime, and then I'm going to talk about the book that I recently wrote called Trade Up. And we'll talk through that, but I'm going to give you some exercises and some things for you to think about. That doesn't mean that you're in this season, and I'm not insinuating that you're in this season of life, of halftime, but I think some of these exercises may be helpful for you to just begin thinking. There are exercises that I went through, it's exercises that we do at halftime. So let's get started. I'm going to share a little bit with you. In 1995, some of you raised your hand when you were asked about halftime. Halftime was written by a gentleman named Bob Buford. And Bob Buford started two ministries. He started a ministry called Leadership Network, which was a focus on mega churches. And then he started this ministry called Halftime. His kind of mentor was a gentleman named Peter Drucker. And some of you may have heard of Peter Drucker. And when Bob got to this point in his life of trying to figure out what should I do next, Peter said, well, hey, why don't you write a book about your life? And he said, what would the book be called? He goes, well, why don't you call it Halftime, Going from Success to Significance? There was absolutely no expectation by Bob at that time for this book to sell or be well received. It was really just a book or a next stage in his life. It was something for him to do. Well, we fast forward 22 years, and some of you may know this. Over 1 million copies of that book has sold. It's been translated in numerous different languages, and we are in countries all over the world. But what's fascinating to me, and I'll share this with you, is Gallup did a poll not too long ago. And the poll asked people about their work. And what was interesting is 1 in 5 said that they go to work every day. I thought that was my phone. But 1 in 5 go to work every day, and they find that their work has absolutely no meaning. 80% of men and women get up every single day and go to work and find that they have no meaning. So it inspired me a few years ago to write the book Trade Up. And what I wanted to do is capture what we have learned over 22 years of doing halftime. For those of you that may have gone through the program years ago, it used to be where you would come to Dallas, it would be a 27-hour seminar, and then we would push people out the door and say, good luck, go serve someplace. And after 22 years, we have learned that it's much more than that. There's a spouse involved, there's kids involved, there's faith involved, there's health involved, there's all sorts of things. So the book that you have in front of you, which is a gift from me, is my book, and it's taking a look at the last 22 years and what we've learned. So what I wanted to do today is share with you 7 principles using the acronym TRADE UP. This is some of Halftime's secret sauce. I want it to be helpful to you as it has been helpful to myself and to others. And my prayer is that you will walk out of here with, like I said earlier, something tangible that you can use as you go forward. You may be thinking, as I was in 2006, what is life all about? I remember sitting on my 40th floor, in my 40th floor office building, looking out the window. I had a beautiful wife, 2 kids, and I thought to myself, there has to be more to life than this. It was all about me making money and being successful. So I don't know if you're in that season of life right now or not, but my hope is that these 7 principles may trigger something. It may help you think through, how can I leave a legacy? How can I make an impact for humanity and for God's kingdom? So let's get right into it. I'm going to use this clicker here, so bear with me 1 second. The 3 disruptive questions that I want to ask, and I typically ask at the very beginning, and I just want you to think through these questions as I talk through them. And we share these at the Halftime Institute. The 3 questions have to do with business principles, quite honestly, but they're more attached to your individual life. So let's walk through those. Number 1 is cost accounting. And the reason I mention cost accounting is that what is all your success costing you? What is all my success costing me? So in 2006, when I hit this halftime season, my success was costing me my relationship with my wife. It was costing me quality time with my kids. It was costing me my health. I actually was going through a season of breaking out in hives. And I was struggling, and it had more to do with stress and what I was putting myself under. So I'm asking, as you think through that question, what is it costing you? Is it costing you your spouse, the relationship with your wife? Is it costing you your relationship with your kids? Is it costing you your relationship with your health? Is it costing you your faith? It's always costing something. It reminds me of a gentleman who went through our program, and he was working 60 to 70 hours a week and ended up building this substantial insurance company. But nowadays, he's on his 3,000-acre ranch in Austin, Texas by himself because he lost his wife and he lost his children because he wasn't there for them. So it's just, what is it costing you? The second is asset protection. Asset protection has to do what is priceless in your life And what are you doing to protect it? What is priceless in your life, and what are you doing to protect it? It may be your spouse, it may be your kids, it may be your health, it may be your faith, some of those things I mentioned earlier. But what is it for you, and what are you doing to protect it? So for me personally, I needed to make a decision back in the early 2000s of what was priceless in my life. And what was priceless in my life was my marriage. I went through one marriage and got divorced in 1994. I wasn't going to do that again. I had two beautiful kids that I wanted to live life with. So what's priceless, and what do I do proactively about that? I spend the beginning of the year going through my calendar, making sure that date night, dance recitals, and football are on my calendar before anything else is on there. We have a gentleman at halftime, you may know him, his name's Lloyd Reeb, and he was trying to think through, how could I do something with Linda every week that was priceless? How do I protect that relationship? That's his wife. And he calls it a Linda Day. And the Linda Day is every Friday, Linda gets to pick whatever she wants to do for the whole day, and he just does it. And I don't know about you guys, but I did that with my wife. I said, Lisa, I want to try something new. I want to do a Lisa Day. And she said, Dean, let me just tell you something. Every day is a Lisa Day. So I'm just here to tell you it does work. She is priceless, but I have learned every day is a Lisa Day. So for you, what is priceless, and what are you doing to protect it? Thirdly, metrics. Metrics have to do with if you're looking out 2 years from now and your life was perfect, what would that look like? What would that look like for you? I'm not asking you what would you be doing. I'm asking what would that look like? So for me, it would be a flourishing marriage with my wife. It would be us, both of us, being in God's sweet spot, the calling He has for our lives. It would mean that our kids have high self-esteem and are succeeding at whatever they're doing, and that our faith would be stronger than ever. So when you think about your own life and you think out 2 years from now, is it perfect right now, or are there some adjustments that need to be made? So it's very thought-provoking in my mind. So we're going to go through the acronym TRADE UP, and we're going to start with the T, which makes sense. And T stands for Think of Your 80th Birthday Party. This was an exercise that I did when I was 46, and it was quite shocking to me as I went through this exercise, because when I was 46, and I started thinking about my 80th birthday, my focus was so much on myself. It wasn't on others. And the way the exercise goes is that you go home, it's your 80th birthday, and your spouse invites you to a restaurant. And at that restaurant is 100 of your closest family, friends, and business associates. And there's a microphone in front of the room, and they walk up and they answer this question. Beyond your marriage, family, and friends, the most significant contribution you've made to humanity is what? And I remember when I went through that exercise, I thought to myself, I'm having no impact on humanity. I'm having a lot of impact on Dean Niewolny. I'm having a lot of impact on myself, but I'm not having impact on anyone else. I went through that season really beginning to think, what does a life of significance, like Bob Buford would say, what does that look like? What do I need to do to get aligned with God's plan for my life? And I remember at the same time I went to a funeral for a little old lady, and there had to be 500 people there. And I didn't understand why there were so many people there. And I asked the girl next to me, why are there all these folks here? And she said, it's because this lady built into those folks. She cared about them. She loved them. She built into their lives. And right then I thought to myself, if today was my funeral, one, I don't know if anybody would be there. But secondly, if they were there, what would they say? I mean, what impact was I really having in life? I mean, what What was the legacy that I was leaving at that point? So the 80th birthday party, thinking about your 80th birthday party, is a powerful exercise that we use to get people thinking about the future. What type of legacy are you leaving? What type of legacy are you leaving for your children or for your family? Bob Buford, when I went through the Halftime Institute program, shared a few things, but a number of things, but two things really stood out to me. One is Ephesians 2:10, and many of you know this verse. For we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works that he has prepared beforehand. That he has prepared beforehand. Bob also said, it's not going from success to significance. If you read the tagline of the Halftime book, it'll say going from success to significance. It's really going from success to significance to ultimate surrender. And as a type A personality, this idea of getting to surrender was scary for me because I was someone who wanted to control everything that I was doing. So this idea of saying, Lord, what would you like to do with the rest of my life? I'm open, I surrender, whatever you want to do, I will do, is scary. Now, most people think when they do that, they're going to be shipped off to Africa. Rarely does that happen. Rarely does that happen. And actually, many think that if they go through the Halftime Institute program and they do this surrender, that they're going to have to leave what they love to do, and that is the marketplace job that you're so successful at. 60 to 70% of folks that go through the Halftime Institute stay right where they're at. They don't leave the marketplace. They figure out what their ministry is in the marketplace. Let's move on to the R. The R is review your schedule. And we always say no margin, no mission. So you have to make time and space as you identify what you want to do going forward. I spent a lot of time on the upkeep of my possessions. So I started to look at my schedule and tried to build margin into my time, into my talent, and into my treasure. When you do that, you will ultimately get to a point where you carve out enough time to go and serve in your area of passion. So if you don't have time in your schedule, there's no way you can go and serve in your area of passion. I had a passion in 2007 to serve the homeless. I wanted to help the homeless put together their resumes so they could go out and get gainfully employed. But what I realized was that I was working 60 hours a week. I had no time to go and serve in my area of passion. So it's really important for you to look at your schedule, if you're in this season, to think through how can I build margin around my time, talent, and treasure so I can go serve in that area of passion. The beauty of what happened with me is I carved out Thursday afternoons, and that began a journey for me that ultimately got me to this point of joy, impact, and balance. And I think for all of us, that's where we want to get. I'm still on that journey. I'm still working through it. But building time and margin into your calendar, critically important. The last thing I'll just say on that is there's many things that we do and many things that I do that I could double up on. There's many things that I do that I don't need to do, that I could get rid of, like watch ESPN quite a bit. But you know, there's things like that. I love to work out, so I've just found that running and listening to a devotional or doing a Bible study or listening to a talk while I run, I can double up on some of those things so I can build margin in my calendar. Let's move on to A. A is assessing your strengths, your gifts, and your passions. What are your strengths, gifts, and passions? Many don't take the time to actually take a step back and focus on yourself. It sounds selfish, doesn't it? I'm going to take time to really try to figure myself out. But at the end of the day, if I asked you, what are your strengths? What are your spiritual gifts? What are your passions? Would you be able to answer that? So if I look at my strengths, I'm a relator, Okay, I'm a harmony guy. I hate dysfunction. Even at halftime, I don't like dysfunction. I'm an achiever. Okay, I'm a connector and I'm a developer. So I'm in the right role, I think, as the CEO of halftime. And those strengths serve me well. As my spiritual gifts are wisdom, discernment, and encouragement. Okay? So for you, as you think through what are your strengths and what are your spiritual gifts, you need to begin thinking through, how do I use those in my area of passion? But what is your passion? That was the challenge for me. I went to the Halftime Institute program in 2008, and I walked in there, and I thought, I'm going to walk out the door, and someone's going to hand to me a ticket saying, Dean, this is what you're going to do the rest of your life. Well, it didn't quite work that way. 2 years later, is when I ultimately figured out, with the help of a halftime coach, what I was going to do. But the passion piece is interesting, because most come to halftime and they will say, I'm not passionate about anything. Let me just encourage you, you're passionate about something. You have passion about something. So I'll give you a story. There was a gentleman who went through our program. We tell people, if you're not passionate about anything, read the USA Today for a week, and then come back to us and tell us what makes you mad, sad, or glad. Okay? Pretty simple. It sounds somewhat childish, but it actually works. By the end of the week, he came back. He said, Dean, that doesn't work. All I did was read the sports section the whole week. I said, exactly. That is what you're passionate about. You love sports. There's nothing wrong with that. So he has started an inner city ministry in Memphis, Tennessee for children. His passion was children, and his passion was sports. So as we talk through things that Jesus cares about, because that's what our mission statement is at halftime, and for you, start thinking through the issues that Jesus cares about. The orphans, the widows, the poor, homeless, the hungry, the prisoners. When you look at the Bible, Jesus cares about many things that we are going to be asked or held accountable, in my opinion, to serve in. So what gifts can you use, what talents can you use to serve in those areas of passion? Moving on, define your mission. That's the D. All good companies, and I don't need to tell this room, that's for sure. All good companies have a strong mission statement. So, there was some research that was done not too long ago, and I found this quite fascinating. I'll read this to you real quick. Having a high sense of purpose in life may lower your risk of heart disease and stroke, according to a new study led by researchers at Mount Sinai St. Luke and Mount Sinai Roosevelt, presented at the American Heart Association conference in Baltimore. Isn't that fascinating? If you have a purpose, if you know what your calling is, if you know what God's Ephesians 2:10 calling is, your sweet spot, according to the research that they did, it's going to lower your risk of heart disease, which is quite interesting. Harvard did a study not too long ago that said 50% of men and women who are ages 50 to 65 years old would change careers for work with more purpose and meaning. I don't know about you, but there's something about that that's somewhat sad to me. That would tell me that half, obviously, are going to work every day in a workplace or an environment that they feel has no purpose or meaning. At the end of life, and this is what I told myself in 2006, I was reasonably successful in the financial services industry and ran a $110 million business in downtown Chicago. It wasn't nothing fantastic, but reasonably successful. But at the end of the day, I would look in the mirror and say, what impact am I having? What legacy am I leaving? What difference am I making in the issues that Jesus cares about? Because at the end of life, I don't think Jesus is going to say, way to go, Dean, you made a lot of money. Way to go, Dean, you bought a little airplane, and way to go, you had 4 homes and all that. I don't think so. I think for Dean, and I'm talking strictly about myself, that in 2006, I felt like I wanted to know, God, what is your plan? What's your plan for my life? I did not want to be one of the 50% that were 50 to 65. I'm 54. and say, now I go to work every day with no purpose or meaning, but I make a fair amount of money. So the last thing I'll say here regarding a mission statement, the beauty of a mission statement, and again, you all know this, the beauty of a mission statement is it allows you to say no to things that you should say no to, right? There's many opportunities. Once you become available and say, I want to make some sort of transition, and like I said earlier, 60 to 70% of men and women stay right where they're at. They don't leave the marketplace and go into the ministry. That was a misunderstanding actually that I had when I went through the program. But the beauty is once you make yourself available, the beauty or the challenge is that everyone knows it. And you're going to be asked to do many, many different things. And the beauty of a mission statement is to allow you to keep it really tight and stay true to who you are and say no to the things that you're not. Moving on to E. E is explore the possibilities. I shared with you Ephesians 2:10. I'm going to share with you Ephesians 4:1 out of the Message Bible. It says, I want you to get out there and walk, this is Paul, better yet run on the road God called you to travel. I don't want any of you sitting around on your hands. I don't want anyone strolling off down some path that goes nowhere. When I read that the first time, I was like, wow, that is powerful, and that is really, really good. So Paul is encouraging us. If you read the NIV version, I implore you to live out a life worthy of your calling, is what he says. So what does that mean for me and for all of us in this room? It means that we need to have a clear understanding of what God's Ephesians 2:10 or calling is for our lives as we move forward. How do you do this? Well, we talk about low-cost probes at halftime. It's like a funnel. When someone goes through the Halftime Institute, we put in there their passions, their strengths, their spiritual gifts, and all sorts of other exercises that I won't bore you with right now. And it's a top of the funnel type thing. And there's all sorts of possibilities. And then all of a sudden, these things start going down through the funnel. And by the end of whatever time frame it is, it might be a week, a month, a year, 11 years for me, whatever it is for you, it will spit out at the bottom, here's what your gifts and talents and abilities and passions are. And then what we do is we help plug you into what we call low-cost probes. So if someone goes through our program, and at the end of the program, they have a burning passion for children, there's a good likelihood that we may introduce you to World Vision, just as an example. So a number of folks here were asking me today about Halftime Talent Solutions, which is another piece of the Halftime Institute, run by Greg Barnes. Greg is the one that once you go through the program, he will identify opportunities for you to do low-cost probes. The reason low-cost probes are important is high-cost probes are bad if they don't work out. Low-cost probes allow you to put your toe in the water and find out, is this low-cost probe something I should be doing to take to a medium cost to a high cost, okay? For me, I had this burning passion to work with the homeless, like I mentioned earlier, but I worked with the homeless. I was a lay pastor at a church called Willow Creek Community Church up in Chicago, Illinois. I worked with special needs kids. I went to Africa and worked in missions, all great stuff I loved, stuff that gave me incredible experiences. But not everything good is right for you. And that's what I learned for myself. Volunteering and calling is different. Volunteering is, I want to do this. Calling is, I have to do this. It's a big difference. So when I left the financial services world, I was invited by Willow Creek to help with their Good Sense ministry, to help people put their finances in order. And I honestly felt that was like the mailman going for a walk on Saturday. It's like, I do not want to do that because I do that all day long. But after I really got into the program of Halftime, I realized that I had a lot of interests. a lot of good things that I could go do, that I still do, by the way. Working with special needs kids and others, I love that. But it's not my Ephesians 2:10 calling that I have to do. And at the end of the day, the way the whole halftime experience evolved for me and the way I got to become the CEO of Halftime is a fascinating story that I don't have time to share with you today, but it's really a dream that my wife had as we were living up in Chicago. But you know when God is saying to you, you have to go do this. And I remember the interview process. I was asked no less than 10 times, are you called to this? And are you called to this? And I kept being asked that, and I finally remember in the interview, I screamed at him, I don't know if I'm called to this. There's not a sign in my front yard that says, hey, Dean, you go to Dallas, Texas, and become the CEO of Halftime. But you know when the Holy Spirit puts something on your heart that just the way it came about was only by God. And so there's a difference between volunteering and calling. You understand the reality. I write about this a little bit in Trade Up. One of the things that I realized after accepting the offer to come down to Dallas and work for Halftime is this is the hardest job you'll ever love. This idea of going into the ministry and this idea of we're all going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya and praise Jesus all day doesn't happen. I'm just telling you, it happens some days, but it doesn't happen every single day. And I remember a good friend of mine from Willow Creek saying to me, Dean, if you think you're going to leave the marketplace and go into this cushy ministry opportunity and we're all walking around here with halos over our head, you have another thing coming, because it's not like that here. And one of the things I just want to get out there is that if you make a transition from the marketplace to the ministry or stay in the marketplace, ministry is not easy. That's what I've learned. Ministry is not easy. So if the decision or the thought process as you're going through this, if you get to this point, is I'm going to go and do ministry because it's easier and I can kind of relax, you're going to be in for a rude awakening. Because I would argue with you that ministry is held to a higher calling than the marketplace. They're both held to high callings. But when you're doing God's work every single day, which you're doing in the marketplace, okay, you're held to a very high calling. So the reality of going into the ministry for me personally is I didn't want to make the transition. This is why I wrote it in the book. I didn't want to make the transition because I was so burned out and tired of the marketplace, the financial services world. I wanted to go because truly God was calling me during this season to make that transition, not because I needed to run from something, but I'm being called to something, okay? Let's move on. We'll move on to P. Populate your journey. This is one of the most important pieces to the puzzle. When we look at the tens of thousands of hours of coaching that we have done over 22 years at Halftime, there's 5 things that stand out for someone who has succeeded and has moved on and is flourishing versus those that struggle and fall by the wayside. The 5 things are, number 1, they're crystal clear on their Ephesians 2:10 calling. They know exactly what God is calling them to do. Doesn't mean the calling can't change. Bob Buford, who wrote the book Halftime, if you look at the sigmoid curve, you guys all know what sigmoid curves are, and he has 16 of them. So he's still in his wheelhouse. He's still aligned with his calling, but he's done 16 different things within his mission statement. So the 5 things are calling, flexibility. As we get older, as I'm learning, we get less flexible, but we've learned that people who are flexible succeed more than others. They take care of their health. They put their spouse's dreams number 1. This is a huge learning over the last few years. I know it sounds so obvious, but for someone like myself, as I mentioned in 2006, I surely wasn't doing that. But I can't tell you the difference it makes when we have half-timers go through our program and we say to them, hey, you need to go home and ask your spouse, honey, what are your dreams and aspirations? What do you want to do? What's God calling you to do? And most half-timers that are in the program, and it's men and women, will look at us and say, no, God's calling me to do this. I got to go no matter what my spouse wants. I got to go. And the reality is God doesn't do that. He wouldn't do that unless you're equally yoked. And I remember Bob Buford, when I got there in 2008, I said, God, I feel God's calling me to go and do something different. And Bob said to me, I believe he probably is, Dean, but do not move forward without being equally yoked to Lisa, your wife. So the 5 things again: calling, flexibility, health, spouse's dreams, and the last is encouragement. We talk a lot about personal board of directors. I chatted a little bit about mission statements. Good corporations have board of directors. Many of you sit on boards, I'm sure. Your personal board of directors is incredibly important. That is a group of people that love you and that you can talk to, that will tell you things you need to hear but you may not want to hear, okay, that are scripturally sound, that are always there for you. So when you have a marital issue, when you have a child issue, when you're thinking of making a job transition, when you're struggling with whatever you may be struggling with, who are the 3 to 4 to 5 people that you go to that are your personal board of directors? And the best advice I can give you about this is make sure your spouse is on there. Make sure your spouse is one of them. So the idea of a personal board of directors, critically important. Honest feedback from those who love and will give it to you. It's so important. When we look over 22 years of folks who have succeeded and flourished in their second half calling, it's those who stayed connected to a coach. It's the same thing for a Michael Jordan, a Phil Mickelson, a Tiger Woods. You name the person. They continually get better. They stay connected to their coach. So the Halftime Institute has one-on-one coaches. If you go through this season of life, or if you're in this season of life, my encouragement is for you to identify a coach who can guide you through the pitfalls of what may happen. One of the most interesting things that has happened over the last 2 or 3 years, that I've seen anyway, is Halftime has gone from being an organization that helps men and women figure out their Ephesians 2:10 calling to much more of a discipleship ministry. We are spending much more time on helping people with their marriage, with their children, with their health, and with their spiritual walk, and many other things. But you know what the number one obstacle is? The number one obstacle is identity. It's identity. And that is when someone makes this transition and they leave the marketplace and go into the ministry, they think, who am I? What is my identity? I used to be the CEO. I used to be the managing director. I used to be this executive, and now who am I? And it's not just the person going through the program. It's the spouse and the children. What's my dad do? Shoot, my dad's 88. He still asks me, I don't know what you do, Dean. What's this whole halftime thing? He doesn't understand what I'm doing day in and day out. But my kids really, they're like, okay, Dad, I know that you were a managing director at Wells Fargo Advisors, which was my last stop. But what is this now? Who are you now? So I had a gentleman who was an executive, who I'll leave unnamed, with the Texas Rangers, and was making a transition, came through our program, and stopped the program and went back because he just couldn't handle the fact that he was losing his identity. So I'll just leave that point and say our identity is in Jesus Christ. And the sooner one can understand that, the simpler this journey surely becomes. All right. I'm going to leave you with something from Randy Elkhorn. Many of you have probably read his books. It's from his book, In Light of Eternity. If I can read this for you, please. Your death will be like a final buzzer at a basketball game. No shots taken thereafter will count. If you fail to use your money and possessions and time and talent and energies for eternity, then you failed, period. At your death, the autobiography you've written with the pen of faith and the ink of works will go into eternity unedited, to be seen and read as is by all the angels, all the redeemed, and God himself. And it leaves me thinking as I walk off here, and we can open it up to questions too. I mentioned earlier a gentleman named Greg Barnes, and Greg mentioned to me one day, he said, Dean, wouldn't it be cool if you think about the earth, if everyone figured out their Ephesians 2:10 calling and they were all in God's sweet spot, we'd have heaven on earth, wouldn't we? So I want to leave you with that. That's my thought every day. That's what drives us at halftime. That's what drove me to read or write Trade Up, this vision of every man and woman understanding clearly God's sweet spot in their Ephesians 2:10 calling. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Dean, thanks so much, and I cannot wait to read the book. That was a tremendous blessing to us. I think you could summarize his message in the words of the great theologian Oscar Wilde. He said, be yourself, everybody else is already taken. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about with Ephesians 2:10. There's a unique calling that we all have that nobody can step in and take our place. So let's pray and we'll be gone. You know, one of the things that Dean said that I think are so crucial is that our identity has got to be found in Jesus. And let me just say, if you're here this afternoon and you're not really sure what that means, what exactly that's about, this whole thing called Christianity and Jesus, it's just hard to grasp. And the reason for the season, what we call Christmas, is that you can't get there on your own. And the starting place for everything that Dean's talked about last 40 minutes, the starting place for knowing really how to live life, knowing that eternity is absolutely squared away, that you'll be spending all of it in a place where there's no more tears, nor sorrow, nor crying. All the former pain will be past. All that hinges on one very simple reality, and that is that God is extending to you a gift. It's the gift of his son. And his son died 2,000 years ago on a cross so that every sin you've committed, I've committed, all have committed, was paid for on that day. But we do have to do something. It's a historical fact. But it won't become a personal reality until we reach out in our own heart and say to the Lord Jesus, thank you for my sins. Right here, right now, I want to invite you to come and live inside of me and make me the man that I cannot be on my own. And if you'd like to do that, I invite you to pray this prayer along with me. Lord Jesus, I realize that I've not been the man I could have been or should have been. But how I thank you for dying for all my sins. And right here, right now, I just want to say, I'm in. Please come into my heart. Change me. I can't make it on my own. Thank you, Jesus. Amen. See you guys in 2018. Thanks.